Firstpost reports from the world's second largest continent. Hello, I'm Alyson Grange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa. We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. From elections to climate change to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global south. Join me every weekday live on Firstpost. Hello and welcome to Firstpost Africa, where we get you the top stories from the continent and from across the world. I'm Alyson Grange, coming to you live from Durban, South Africa. First, let's take a look at the headlines. Donald Trump signs over 200 executive orders in less than 6 hours of taking oath as the President of the United States. Washington exits the WHO, ends birthright citizenship in a series of executive orders that cover everything from immigration, climate, trade, and pardons. Russian President Vladimir Putin holds a video call with Chinese President Xi Jinping. The two leaders propose developing further strategic ties just hours after Donald Trump was sworn in as the 47th US president. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer vows to fight the changing face of terrorism. This after a British teenager born to Rwandan parents admitted to the murder of 3 young girls in a stabbing spree that triggered riots last year. Shelling by paramilitary forces on a famine-stricken displacement camp kills at least 16 civilians in Sudan's Al-Fashir, the besieged capital of the North Darfur province. And a fire breaks out at a popular ski resort hotel in northwestern Turkey, killing at least 66 people and injuring another 51. Officials launch an investigation and detain 4 suspects to determine the cause of the fire. Hello and welcome. Let's take a look at our top story. Yesterday, the United States got a new president. Donald Trump took oath as the 47th President of America. He made a comeback to the White House after leaving it 4 years ago. His inauguration ceremony that took place in the capital city of Washington, D.C., was closely watched by millions of people across the world. In what was arguably the most unusual inauguration in American history, President Donald Trump pledged that the golden age for the country had just begun. He promised to make America great again, while he also used his inauguration address to lay out a series of executive actions that his administration would undertake, especially on immigration, energy, and trade. However, what was missing in his nearly 30-minute-long inauguration address was the mention of Africa, which happened to be mentioned a total of 0 times. Now, President Trump spoke about America. He also spoke about Panama, Mexico, China, and the BRICS bloc. He even addressed the chaos and destruction left by the previous administration. But he failed to mention even a single African nation in his inauguration address.
The golden age of America begins right now. From this day forward, our country will flourish and be respected again all over the world. We will be the envy of every nation, and we will not allow ourselves to be taken advantage of any longer. During every single day of the Trump administration, I will very simply put America first.
Even at his inauguration ceremony, while there were a slew of foreign leaders ranging from India to Italy who had been invited to attend his swearing-in, there was not a single African leader on the guest list. And post his swearing-in ceremony, only Egypt and South African presidents congratulated Trump on his inauguration. This was in contrast to November of 2024, when several African leaders, including Kenya and Nigeria, had congratulated Trump on his victory. Now, Africa has generally been low on the priority list for the United States for years. Last year, former President Joe Biden had made a trip to Angola to show that the U.S. was shifting its perspective and attention to Africa. Still, he was not successful. Russia and China have both made significant inroads into the continent, and U.S. allies, including France, have lost their influence in the region. Trump, on the other hand, had also not done much for Africa in his first term. He also does not share close camaraderie with any African leader. During his first term, he never set foot in Africa or held a summit with African leaders. He is known to have made some derogatory and racist remarks toward African countries. He withdrew American soldiers from Somalia fighting terror group Al-Shabaab, a decision that was later reversed by the Biden administration. He also escalated Egypt-Ethiopia tensions as he commented that Egypt should blow up an Ethiopian dam on the Nile River, which has been the center of a dispute between the two African nations. But his first term also saw some positives. It saw the birth of initiatives such as Prosper Africa, aimed at boosting U.S.-Africa economic engagement. Then, in a key development, Trump recognized Morocco's sovereignty over the territory of Western Sahara in exchange for its normalization of ties with Israel. Despite all of it, Trump turned out to be a president with the least engagements with Africa. However, experts believe that Trump may not be able to neglect Africa like he did during his previous term. Estimated at over 1 billion people, Africa's population is growing fast and expected to reach 2.5 billion by 2050. It is emerging as a big market that is playing an important role in the global economy. Secondly, China and Russia's increasing influence, especially in businesses and military partnerships, might interest Trump in engaging more with Africa. He might want to counter both China and Russia in the continent. But with no mention of Africa in his inauguration speech, concerns are growing whether Trump's second term will be just the same as his first tenure. Now, to discuss more on this, we have with us Khani Magubane, a political analyst who is joining us live from Johannesburg, South Africa. Thank you for being with us, Khani.
A very good evening to you and your viewers.
Now, Khani, how significant is it that President Trump's inauguration speech did not mention Africa? And what message might this send to African leaders and nations about his administration's priorities?
Understand what the purpose was. If you listen very carefully, he didn't mention Africa, he didn't mention Europe, he didn't mention India, he didn't mention Asia. So he stayed away from foreign policy and diplomatic relationships that America currently has with different countries in the world. This speech was about making America great again. If we listen to the speech, Donald Trump spent a significant amount of time talking about what had gone wrong under the Democrats. He spoke about what he called a catalog of catastrophic events overseas. He spoke about the previous administration's ability to properly handle domestic issues, pointing to weather-related events like the fires, like the floods that have happened in North Carolina, and what many have termed as the government's inadequate response to all of that. He said that America will be the envy of the world again. America is going into its golden era. He spoke about what his administration is going to do starting with these 200 executive orders that he spoke at length about. So this speech was really about taking the American citizens back into his confidence, back into the confidence of believing that America will once again be, the free world and the free leader and the leader of the free world. But of course, we have to ask ourselves, why was it necessary for Donald Trump to make such a speech? Well, as far as the world's relations with the U.S. are concerned, the U.S., is not really on good terms with quite a significant amount of countries. And as you've mentioned, in your intro, only South Africa and Egypt from the continent of Africa wished him well, which just goes to show that America feels that it's in a bit of a vulnerable position where it's weakened its position under the Democrats. Donald Trump, is definitely peddling the narrative that under his administration, America will rise again. And of course, with the threat of BRICS, that is a very serious, journey that he wants to go on, because if, the BRICS economic bloc were to adopt the BRICS currency, as we saw the Russian President Vladimir Putin taking a jab at the U.S. when he waved that sample around. It certainly sent fears to the U.S. government that unless it entrenches its position again as the leader of the free world, they may lose it.
Kani, thank you very much for being with us on Firstpost Africa. As always, great to speak with you.
Thank you so much.
Shifting focus to Mozambique, a country that has been on edge for months. The country has been crippled by months of post-poll violence. At least 300 people have lost their lives for protesting against the election results that extended the ruling Frelimo party's almost 50 years of rule. Mozambicans have been marching all this while on the calls of opposition leader Venancio Mondlane, who had claimed the vote was stolen from him. But now the man leading these anti-government protests has himself hinted that he could join the government. In an interview, Mondlane said that the idea of joining the rival government is not very far-fetched. He says he has suspended the protests and is in fact ready to serve in the government led by his rival and the newly inaugurated President Daniel Chapo. However, Mondlane has put out certain conditions. Now, these include an unconditional release of about 5,000 people detained for participating in demonstrations against the election results. Second, paying financial compensation to the families of the people killed by police during the protests, and also offering free medical treatment for those injured. Mondlane said that if Chapo agrees to this, he would open a window for negotiations, or else he would call on his supporters to renew the protests. Meanwhile, the new president, Daniel Chapo, has also said that his team is considering whether Mondlane should be invited to join his government. Chapo says he wants to govern in an inclusive way, and joining hands with Mondlane is not off the cards. 48-year-old Daniel Chapo was sworn in as Mozambique's president last week. He was declared the winner in the disputed election of October last year. But the presidential runner-up, Mondlane, said that the mandate was stolen from him. For months, he mobilized youth against the election result while he was in self-imposed exile. He returned just ahead of Chapo's oath-taking ceremony and vowed to paralyze the nation with protests every day. Many Mozambicans who believed in Mondlane would come out onto the streets in huge numbers. Many of them were met with huge police crackdown and also lost their lives. However, their faith in Mondlane did not shake. Mozambican youth, which is now fed up with Frelimo's long reign, want to see a change, and Mondlane gave them the hope that he could bring the change for them.
With his arrival is a hope that opens for us, is more of a shine as we all are in the darkness. With his arrival is a bit of relief. We will see what's going to happen. He comes to light the flame that was already extinguished in us.
For supporters, we can't give up. This war will continue, Today they are being sworn in, but if things don't change, we will continue. We will do everything to achieve the outcome we want. We Mozambicans now aware we are no longer in the past. We will no longer close our eyes.
But it is unclear if these supporters will consider their fight over if Mondlane joins the Frelimo government. Venancio Mondlane, the 51-year-old former radio presenter, is very popular among the youth. However, it will not be the first time he will be switching sides. In fact, he is known to have jumped political sides before. Now, he also earned himself the name Grasshopper by critics. But if he did so this time, will it be an attempt at peace or just another political tactic? And now let's turn our attention to West Africa, where Russia has delivered military hardware to Mali. Russia delivered over 100 military vehicles to Mali last week. The delivery reportedly included a number of tanks, trucks, artillery systems, and infantry fighting vehicles. Images on social media platforms showed that a convoy of over 100 vehicles arrived in Mali's capital of Bamako, reportedly from Syria, where Russian troops had departed following the fall of Bashar al-Assad's regime. Local media reports indicate that half of the vehicles in the convoy were trucks, including armoured Kamaz trucks and engineering vehicles. The convoy also included T-72 tanks, BMP-3 infantry fighting vehicles, as well as armoured personnel carriers such as BTR-82, Spartak, Linza and Tiger. Reports suggest that the convoy also included D-30 towed artillery pieces, anti-aircraft cannons and a couple of boats. However, there was also a significant number of unidentified vehicles as they were covered during the transportation. Now, Russia has been allegedly withdrawing large amounts of military hardware and troops from Syria, where rebels ousted Bashar al-Assad last year and established a new transitional administration. Russia has reportedly moved some of its military equipment to the northern African nation of Libya, where Moscow has recently reinforced runways and perimeter defenses at air bases. And Mali allegedly appears to be the next recipient of this equipment from Syria. Mali, along with its neighbors Burkina Faso and Niger, have in recent years grown extremely close to Russia, and this is especially true after the military came to power in 2021 in Mali and ousted the West African country's longtime ally, France. Since then, Mali has been courting Moscow for greater military support amid growing jihadist insurgency from Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, while turning its back on the West. In recent years, Moscow has supplied Bamako with ammunition, fighter aircraft, sensors and combat helicopters, among others, to fight the rising threats from insurgents. Moreover, reports suggest that Russia, which has been forging new partnerships across Asia and Africa to counter its growing isolation, has also expanded a military base in the capital Bamako at a former site of the Africa Corps. Now, formerly called the Wagner Group, a private military contractor linked to the Kremlin, additionally, Russian mercenaries as part of Africa Corps have also been fighting the jihadist insurgents side by side with the Malian armed forces since late 2021. And reports indicate that the recent Russian military hardware delivery to Mali might just be for the Africa Corps operating in the West African country, despite Mali claiming that it is destined for its armed forces. So as Russia ramps up its support for the Sahel countries, one will be watching out for whether it helps curb the growing insurgency in the region or not. And for our last story, let's shift focus to the East Africa, where it seems Kenya is preparing for a war, not against terrorists or any enemy state, but against memes and social media posts that express dissent against the William Ruto government. Kenya is planning to tighten control of social media. The government is forming a strategy to combat what it calls digital abuse. It has ordered social media platforms operating in the country to actively monitor and take action against violent, hateful and unbalanced content. The Interior Ministry says Kenyans are using social media irresponsibly and are disregarding the limits of free speech. The ministry earlier also tweeted that all of the social media platforms operating in the country would be required to set up local offices. However, that post was later removed. Currently, Google and Microsoft are the only tech giants with local offices in Kenya. Meanwhile, Kenya's Foreign and Diaspora Ministry has shared concerns that Kenya's online are misinforming the world about the activities of the Kenyan government. The ministry blamed some social media influencers are bent on discrediting the government internationally. So it seems social media influencers are the Kenyan government's new enemies. However, these influencers have been facing government's crackdown for a while now. Months ago, social media gave birth to the Kenyan government's biggest challenge in recent times. Kenya's Gen Z rallied against the tax hikes that President Ruto proposed last year. The youth not just mobilized the rallies on social media, but also live-streamed them. These anti-tax protests slowly turned into a wider campaign against President Ruto. Kenyans demanded Ruto's resignation. They were met with heavy police crackdown. Over 70 people were reportedly killed. Hundreds were detained, while many were abducted. In Kenya, several government critics have been abducted since last year's protests, and protesters and human rights groups accuse the Ruto government of the crackdown. While protests may have been clamped down from the Kenyan streets, they have shifted online amid the crackdown. Many Kenyans are taking to social media to express frustration with the government. Some are calling Ruto Zakayo, a term inspired by a biblical tax collector, and some are calling him to resign using the hashtag Ruto must go. Then some say that Kenya under Ruto has become part of Abductistan, and the country is in fact a headquarter of abductions. Memes have in fact become a popular tool in Kenya to counter state policies. While authorities crack down with guns, tear gas and canisters, satire and humour have become weapons for young Kenyans. And it turns out the weapon has been effective and has forced the government to press the panic button. And that's it on the show for today. We will see you again tomorrow at the same time. Thank you for watching and goodbye.